You might reasonably ask yourself, what does a cartoon tough man known primarily for his affinity to spinach have to do with fried chicken? Enough to warrant an entire chain of fast food chicken restaurants named after him. It's a good question, and a common misconception, as the truth is, Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen was actually named after a different pop culture tough guy altogether, but we'll get to that in a moment. The story of Popeyes starts in 1972, when Al Copeland, looking to compete with Kentucky Fried Chicken, opened a restaurant called Chicken on the Run in a suburb of New Orleans. After several months, the restaurant failed and was forced to close, but, undaunted, Copeland simply waited 4 days and then reopened the restaurant, under the new name Popeye's Mighty Good Chicken. Notably, there was no apostrophe in the word Popeyes, a quirk that remains true today. Copeland jokingly tells those who asked he was too poor to afford the apostrophe. By 1975, the restaurant had been once again renamed Popeye's Famous Fried Chicken, and in 1976, Copeland began franchising the restaurant, at first only throughout Louisiana, but ultimately it would expand across the U.S. and into Canada, opening its 500th restaurant in 1985. While it has undergone other name changes, at points being called Popeye's Chicken and Biscuits and Popeye's Famous Chicken and Biscuits, before settling, at least for now, on Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen, the chain has remained incredibly successful. Today, it operates as a subsidiary of the Toronto-based Restaurant Brands International Holding Company, which purchased the brand in 2017, and Popeyes has nearly 4,000 locations in 30 countries worldwide. Now, about that name. It's commonly believed the restaurant is named after the famed cartoon and comic strip character Popeye the Sailor Man, created by Elzie Crisler Seeger in 1929. But this is not so, according to Copeland, who insists he chose the name as an homage to the Gene Hackman detective character Jimmy Popeye Doyle from William Friedkin's The French Connection, which had been released 1 year before Copeland started his restaurant business. Still, the confusion is understandable, since early on Copeland, perhaps realizing he couldn't run away from the perception and might as well embrace it, did allow his restaurant to begin sponsoring the, at the time, already long-running Popeye and Pals block of kids programming on a local New Orleans TV station. And ultimately, the chain would enter into an agreement with King Features Syndicate, the owners of the animated and comic Popeye character, which allowed them to use Popeye the Sailor Man as a restaurant mascot on their packaging and in their marketing, a deal that lasted until 2012. Even though it has now been over 10 years since the last official usage of Popeye the Sailor Man in association with Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen, the two are still intrinsically linked in the minds of many consumers. But one can't help but wonder if another fictional character known for their mighty strength might be just as associated with the restaurant today, if only an attempted early 80s cross-promotion, which saw the restaurant heavily featured in a new movie, had been a little more successful. The year is 1984, and Warner Brothers, or, well, eventually TriStar Pictures, are ready to deliver a spin-off from a beloved comic book movie series, and in the process launch the next big cinematic superhero franchise, with Supergirl.
'Hello, listeners. You've heard of the DCEU. Well, get ready for Failure to Franchise presents the DCPU. Oh my God, open up a window. Jesus. Light a match.
Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And who better to discuss Supergirl this dawn than two guys super headstrong, proving they can never be wrong. But hey, don't blame me, blame Trev for always touching his Omega Hedron.
Only while watching this movie. Come on, to be fair.
Yeah, fair enough.
I also, Chris, I just wanted to throw out, usually this isn't always the case. We don't always have sponsors. But for this episode, we actually have two sponsors. We are being sponsored by A&W and Popeye's Chicken. So
right.
Very exciting. Yes, right. Very exciting.
I'm actually recording on top of a... I'm on top of a roof of a Popeye's right now.
Yeah, be careful up there, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd hate to lose you. Well, if it
bitch.
meant I didn't have to do the rest of this theme, it might be okay, because this is the beginning of what promises to be a doozy for us.
Yes.
We survived Summer Surprise. That was a pretty rough go. Well, thankfully we didn't even have to watch one of the movies, so I guess that helped. But we got through Summer Surprise, and now we're heading into a very long theme for us. We're looking at a series of failed DC Universe movies from across the decades, actually from every decade from the 80s up till now. We're spanning the generations here, because sometimes people think like a lot of attention has been paid to the recent DC failures, and we're here to tell you, you wouldn't be that surprised if you'd been paying attention to them for a while. They've been messing up for a long time, and we're going to be looking at some of those, starting with this episode. You already alluded to it, Chris. For our first installment of the DCPU, we are looking at 1984's Supergirl. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
For sure. It is directed by Jeannot Zwark. Most notable, he directed Jaws 2, tons of TV stuff, including The Practice, Jag, Heroes, Smallville, which we will talk about later for sure. This was written by an F2F alum, Trev, David Odell. He wrote The Muppet Show, Dark Crystal, and Masters of the Universe. So a favorite of Trev's, I think.
Definitely, actually, a favorite of my girlfriend's. She would get really mad if I didn't point out that he's also responsible for one of her favorite movies, Martians Go Home, starring Randy Quaid. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
Yep.
The budget of Supergirl is $35 million. Worldwide, Trev, it made $14.3 million. So this was kind of a catastrophe, would you say?
Yeah.
It had serious ramifications, which I'm sure we will talk about today.
Yes. Yeah, because it was definitely being looked at as an important film for not just its own potential as a franchise, but another franchise. If you're smart, you can probably figure out what we're alluding to. This isn't, the biggest mystery in the world, but yeah. I will say this though, without getting, I know this will come up later too, but in terms of that like small box office gross, at least a little bit of that was my parents and me, because I do remember, I have vague memories of seeing this in the theater when I was 4 years old. So, I'll talk more about that later, obviously.
Cool. This would be my first viewing of this film. Just getting this off the hop here. Trev likes to point out that movies didn't exist to me before Jurassic Park in 1993. So I was time traveling watching this a couple days ago.
Well, I guess I just want to start by asking, what's your general? Because we're both, I'm obviously more of a comic book reader than you are. But you've obviously, like anybody who's into pop culture and into movies over the last couple decades, you've certainly had a lot of exposure to just comic book characters on TV and shows and movies. What's your overall familiarity with like the character of Supergirl? Like, obviously, she's the female Superman, right? But what did you know about this character before sitting down to watch this movie?
Mostly just the CW show, the Melissa Benoist show.
Yeah. And had you seen any of that, or
clips here and there?
Okay.
Years ago, an ex-girlfriend of mine loved The Flash, so I used to watch a lot of The Flash with her. And I did get glimpses over the last few years of these other, CW universe shows as well. So I've seen clips here and there. I've never sat down for a full episode. I know you have said that the CW Supergirl is quite good.
Well, hold on a second.
Oh, okay.
Let's put an asterisk in there. It's like all the Arrowverse shows. It started quite good,
right,
and then went wildly off the rails. By the time Supergirl ended, I wasn't even watching it anymore. I couldn't deal with it by the final seasons. But yes, it did at first. I will especially stand behind the first season, which was actually on CBS, not CW. That first season's really good. Then it was kind of like a little bit more hit and miss, but still mostly decent for 2 and 3. And then suddenly it just like. And I can talk about this later if we want to, but yeah, that's a show that just like really lost its way.
Okay.
But Melissa Benoist always was great as Supergirl.
Right. Especially to Jeb Bush.
I kind of like I like the old school guys like Batman. A little dark these days.
Good choice.
I saw that there's a Supergirl is on TV. I saw it when I was working out this morning. There's an ad promoting Supergirl. She looked pretty hot. I don't know what channel it's on, but I'm looking forward to that.
What would you do to...
Oh, that'll make news.
No, but that's really it. as you said, you're the comic book guy mostly, especially compared to me. I mean, I love all this stuff, obviously, but I am definitely more a Marvel guy, not to even play those two teams together because I think, or against each other. I hate that, but I am more familiar with the Marvel cast of characters, extended and main as well. You know, the DC stuff, like I know the heavy hitters. So when you start to branch out, you kind of lose me. But that was fun though to go. It's gonna be fun to go into this series of episodes with mostly a blank slate on these characters. I think it'll be a kind of a fun back and forth between us, at least.
Well, speaking of those heavy hitters that you do obviously know because everyone does, let me ask the next important question that obviously will feed into the making of this film. Superman, obviously it's a character you know, but how familiar are you with the Christopher Reeve Superman series, which started in 1978? Have you gone back and watched all those? Like, what are just general thoughts on the Christopher Reeve Superman films?
It's been quite a while since I've revisited, especially the first and second ones.
Can I just ask really quickly, did you watch those when you were younger as a kid, even before all this like current superhero boom, or is it something you went back to and checked them out because you started getting into like the MCU stuff and everything?
Mostly, later on.
Okay.
I think I caught obviously on like TBS Superstation or something the amount of reruns of Superman and stuff like that. But the first two movies I really got into, you know, come Blu-ray. You know, that's when I really started to, especially when like the Superman 2, the Donner cut was released and all that sort of thing. Then I was like starting to really get into film, especially, you know, after high school and going into college and things. So that's more or less where I started from. First and second movies, awesome. I obviously love those two. I've only ever seen 3 and 4 one time, but it seems like that was enough. I don't know if I need to revisit those two, but yeah, those ones don't really hold a special place for me. I'm sure there's charms that people have with them or whatnot from their childhood, but there's a reason why that series started to fail as well, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Superman 3 defender, but it's also one of those things where I defend it knowing it's not a great movie. There's just things in it that I like enough that it kind of still captures me. But yeah, obviously 1 and 2, you know, as we said, we've talked on this show before about I don't want to have to bring this up every time, but we're a little different in age. And definitely the early Superman movies were still playing on cable and regular TV a lot when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, Christopher Reeve still was Superman, you know? Like Superman 4 is another movie I remember going to see in the theater. So he was the Superman of my youth, and I don't think I'm saying anything too surprising or shocking when I say, to me, he still is Superman. And I think that's kind of a pretty big consensus among a lot of just Superman fans and movie fans in general. There was just something about Christopher Reeve where he perfectly embodied that character. He was just, you know, that when I think of Superman, I think of Christopher Reeve still.
For sure. There's no horsing around with that guy.
All right. So anyways, this podcast is canceled. I can't do this anymore. You mentioned how obviously it's those first two. And yeah, Superman 1 and 2, a little bit of a hot take here. I prefer the theatrical cut of Superman 2 over the Donner cut. I thought it was cool to see the Donner cut after all, you know, always wondering about it. And it's I don't dislike the Donner cut. I just think theatrical is better.
Is the Donner one when he throws the logo?
It's both.
Oh, it's both. Okay.
We can't get away from that. Well, you know, every Superman movie in this like original series, and we'll talk about this with Supergirl a little bit as well. Like, for as much as they were like, you know, getting a lot of the elements of the comics right, I feel like every single Superman movie just introduces some bizarre power they never really had. So yeah, like from his ability, like there's a scene in the first movie where he like jumps out a window in his Clark Kent clothes, and the clothes just change into the Superman costume. Right. Of course, part 2 has the throwing the shield and the amnesia kiss. So I don't know. Yeah, they're just always making up crap. But yeah, but I definitely love those first two, and like I said, I like 3 quite a bit. But obviously 3, which was the first one, just fully not directed by Donner at all. They brought in Richard Lester, and it was kind of designed to be a comedy vehicle for Richard Pryor. Now, do you know the story behind that, Chris? Because it's kind of interesting, like how that even happened.
Vaguely, but go on for our listeners.
I'm sure you've heard this, but it's like Richard Pryor, after Superman 1 and 2 were such a big deal, Richard Pryor went on Johnny Carson and was talking about how much he loved the Superman films. And he went on this like long comedic riff about what it would be like if he was in a Superman movie. And the Salkinds, who had produced the Superman movies, were watching that at home, and they thought, that's not a bad idea. So they called Richard Pryor and said, why don't we just make this a reality? And so they really built Superman 3 a little bit more around Richard Pryor as like the central character.
Right.
And, I like Richard Pryor. I think Richard Pryor is a better stand-up than he ever was. Well, his movies with Gene Wilder are really great. Most of his solo films, a little shakier. And Superman 3 does not do itself any favors by how much it focuses on him, because you really just want to get back to the Superman stuff.
Right.
But like I said, I still like that movie, but obviously that one, it didn't take America or the world the same way. And they started to see a little bit of diminishing returns already with Superman 3. But they didn't want to give up on this franchise yet. And the interesting thing was the Salkinds had, at the time they bought the rights to Superman, they had bought all the Super family, as it's known.
Right.
They didn't just have Superman. They had every ancillary Superman character, Superboy, Krypto the Super Dog, and, of course, Supergirl. And I believe, Chris, we can talk about this a little bit now as we're getting into the development of this film, that initially Supergirl was supposed to be a part of Superman 3, correct? And that was just that was kind of dropped out at some point.
Yeah, the plot was going to center around Supergirl rescuing Superman in that third movie. So kind of last second, they decided not to go that way and brought in Pryor. So there you go.
Great choice. But when Superman 3 failed, they decided, well, we had been thinking about this already. Well, let's just pull the trigger now. Superman 3 didn't really, set the world on fire, but maybe that people are excited for just the idea of Supergirl as its own thing. So they decided to kind of pivot. And instead of going right into Superman 4, they said, let's take a breather and let's do a spin-off film with Supergirl. The initial idea being that this is still a film that would combine the two heroes.
And this is in the early development of that movie, they wanted Richard Lester back, yes? To make the Supergirl movie?
Yes, yeah.
So do we know exactly why he said no, or is it just because the third one failed so bad, and then even the studio, Warner Brothers stepped in and was like, no, never mind?
I'm guessing that has to be what it was. He was probably just not, thrilled with like the general response to Superman 3. And honestly, Richard Lester was like a bit of a workman's like director. He probably had other stuff lined up. It's not like he was hurting for projects.
Sure.
So it's probably just it didn't fit into his schedule. Maybe he didn't have a great time doing Superman 3, and maybe he just was like, also, I don't want to direct a Supergirl movie. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't, but yeah.
Well, they eventually go to Jeannot's work, and the reason why, this is kind of a funny story, because the reason why they go with Jeannot is because Christopher Reeve had worked with him prior on another project, and then had a meeting
Somewhere
with him.
in Time, great movie, by the way.
Yeah, and wanted to get him on board for this one, but then Christopher Reeve himself denies being in the film entirely. There's plans early on that he's going to be either co-starring or just more of a cameo, or like at least he's in a couple action scenes I know that he's supposed to be in. Supergirl's supposed to save him, again, kind of reaping what they were going to do in 3. They're supposed to fly together. He was supposed to introduce her to the world, and then Christopher Reeve says, I don't really want to be a part of this either. And he's kind of doesn't even really want to play Superman at all anymore, to be honest, especially after 3. So, the Salkinds are a little... I guess they understand it, but they also I don't know if they blame Christopher Reeve, but they do say here that it kind of... his involvement would have changed the film in the sense of giving it a little bit more of a oomph and a little bit more credibility,
Yeah, if they don't blame him for the failure, I know at least Jeanette's work does, I think.
Yes.
Or at least more largely and more publicly. Like, he has talked about how if Reeve had been in the movie, more people would have taken it seriously and it probably would have been a bigger hit, which, you got to kind of agree with.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how much bigger of a hit would have been, considering Superman 3 wasn't a gigantic hit and people maybe were phasing out of this a little bit, but I'm sure it would have made more money if Christopher Reeve had been there and it felt like this was a real, if not passing the torch, then at least a real endorsement from Christopher Reeve, which it never got that.
Now, for your first foray into Supergirl, huge casting call goes out, obviously. The Salkinds want an unknown, but a few of these names that are linked to the project are Demi Moore, Brooke Shields. There was some... for the villain role, Dolly Parton was offered a role for $7 million, by the way. You saw that, hey? Back in the 80s. Funny, she was... they were looking to hire her to play the villain who was a witch. and she denied being the witch because she's like, no way, no amount of money can ever make me play a bad witch ever. Goes back to a conversation me and you had, I think in private. We were talking about how what celebs would really shock you or make you bummed out if they turned out to be horrible. And you said right away it'd be Dolly Parton. And I think you're totally right. She's she's just a gem, you know?
That's the thing. That's like, I get like, I'm sure that's what they were thinking, because there's this thing inside yourself where they're like, wow, that'd be interesting to see her play a villain. But then you think about it, it's like, well, maybe she actually understands well enough that it wouldn't work, because she is just such this like ray of genuine goodness in the world that maybe the audience wouldn't even be able to accept it, and it would fail on its face, you know?
Totally.
So, yeah.
So they come across a newcomer, 19-year-old Helen Slater, to be Supergirl, wows them in the audition. Again, they want somebody that's an unknown. They pay her $75,000 in a 3-picture deal, compared to Christopher Reeve's $250,000 for his debut into Superman.
Huh. I wonder why she got less. I wonder what the key difference is there.
Experience, Trev. So yeah, they go with Helen Slater. Again, complete unknown, right? And I guess we'll talk about how that worked out for the film itself. But yeah,
well, we should say for the villain role, they do get a big star, because that's an important thing. You know, I remember when Batman '89 came out, and such a big deal was paid on the fact that Jack Nicholson got top billing over Michael Keaton. And you still hear people talk about that, like, oh, you know, the villain got top billing in Batman '89, like Jack Nicholson was the bigger star, he got a bigger payday. That's not the first time that it happened. And in fact, you go back to this franchise, and not surprisingly, because Christopher Reeve was a little bit of an unknown, when they did the first Superman, Gene Hackman had top billing in that as Lex Luthor. And this happens again here, where if you're going to go with Helen Slater, an unknown, as Supergirl, you still want to populate the casts with some big names. And they get a few. We'll get into all of them as we talk more about the movie itself. But to just say the one, for the villain, they do get Faye Dunaway. Yeah. So that's your top billed star in this, and that's the actress who swoops in and does take. Because Faye Dunaway says, I don't have anything against playing an evil witch. Give me that money. So.
I also found it was interesting where it came down to the studio interference in this one. Like, obviously, Warner Brothers owns the characters and owns the DC property, even back in the day. And it sounded like them and the Salkinds kind of argued over release dates and here and there, and then it was really delayed a lot. And the WB actually stepped away after production was kind of wrapped and says you can the distribution rights can actually go to TriStar Pictures. That was odd, right? Because apparently they were pretty hands-on for the entire filmmaking process until the end. Yeah,
and you're just kind of like, you know, today Marvel's owned by Disney, but in like, you know, the overall grand scheme of things, that's a fairly recent development. We all know for like a long time that one of the main reasons the MCU exists is because Marvel sold its characters off to all these different, you know, studios to make money. And so you had X-Men and Spider-Man X-Men and Fantastic Four over at Fox, Spider-Man at Sony, and a bunch of other ones at Paramount. And they said, well, at least let's take the Paramount ones and create this MCU. And then ultimately it started to finally, you know, kind of merge more as Disney started swooping in and just taking care of all of it. But for a very, very long time, Warner Brothers has owned all of DC. So you would just always assume that any DC movie would be a Warner Brothers, you know, release. And the vast majority of them were. But like I said, on this one, they were just like so frustrated with the Salkinds, you know, their behavior during the movie. Probably, you know, what had gone down with Donner on the first Superman movies.
Yep. And
the underperformance of Superman 3. They were just ready to be like, nah, you know what, this one, even though we helped produce it, we helped finance it, you can let someone else distribute it. And ultimately, I guess they were proven right. So.
Oh, they were. And the funny thing, too, is the Salkinds, you know, this property itself exchanged hands, but then its failure ultimately leads the Salkinds to sell the rights to one of our or your favorites of studios, the Cannon Group. Yeah. So, you know, we, or film people, I guess, know the Cannon Group for making a lot of schlock, a lot of, you know, shoestring budgets, and purely, well, Well, they're not the greatest. The junk.
If you want to know what we're talking about, just go watch their Superman movie, Superman 4: Quest for Peace. It's right there for you. Like that very much looks and feels like what a canon Superman movie would be. Yeah. So.
They reuse like a ton of flying shots, right? Like if I remember correctly, like almost every single time Christopher Reeve is flying, it's from the other movies, and they've kind of superimposed it all through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure any like cheap, shortcut they could take on that, they did. So because that's the movie that finally comes in and puts the final nail in this overall franchise.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you want to get into? Well, hold on. I don't want to say what I was.
Hold on a second. Hold on.
Hold on.
What are you, Matt Frewer? What are you?
Let's discuss Supergirl. Okay.
Is she? I think I recognize the costume.
The question remains, just who on earth are you?
On Earth, I'm Lee. Linda Lee.
You just leave this poor kid alone and worry about the other one that flies. Because nobody gets in my way.
Wait 1 minute. I mean, you can do the whole number, leap tall buildings at a single bound, and look right through things.
Yes.
Bend steel bars?
Yes.
Enjoy your prison, Supergirl. Forever and ever.
Alexander Salkind presents the action-packed adventures of a dazzling new superhero, starring Peter O'Toole.
I must be sent to the Phantom Zone.
Faye Dunaway, Mia Farrow.
Venus? When?
Brenda Vaccaro, Mark McClure.
That's Clark Kent's cousin.
Art Bachner. And introducing Helen Slater as Supergirl. Adventure runs in the family.
Kara Zor-El, cousin of Kal-El, lives in Argo City, an isolated Kryptonian community that survived the planet's destruction by being transported into inner space. Zoltar, a wizard, has allowed Kara to observe a unique and immensely powerful item known as the Omegahedron, which powers Argo City. However, a mishap leads to the Omegahedron being rocketed into space. Kara then follows the orb to Earth, while also undergoing a transformation into Supergirl. With her newfound superpowers, Kara works to recover the orb from the clutches of a power-hungry sorceress named Selena and save Argo City and Earth from imminent doom. Oh, and she decides to weasel her way into an all-girls private school for some reason, and then just sort of forgets about her mission altogether. Supergirl!
Yeah, and you didn't talk about the other main thrust of this. Let's not overlook the fact that what this ultimately boils down to, this amazing, one of the first female superhero movies. It really boils down to two women fighting over a man.
Yes, it does.
So I will go first. I have more history with this, as we alluded to at the beginning.
Sure.
And Chris, we haven't talked too much about it, but I'm guessing you probably have an idea of how I feel about this movie, but we'll see how much it lines up to what you're thinking.
Okay.
Because I think I kind of, without even thinking about it, we try not to talk about our feelings in the movies, but in doing some prep for this one, I accidentally let slip to you that I have this on DVD already. Mm-hmm. And that was probably kind of telling. So, yes, I am a fan of this movie. However, let me again put some caveats on this because
asterisk.
Yeah, because there are reasons I'm a fan of this movie, and as I was talking about this earlier with Superman 3, sometimes, especially things you grow up with, you can be a fan of and at the same time recognize its weaknesses and its flaws. And this is obviously a very, very flawed film. Mm-hmm. But do I think it's a fun, flawed film? Yes, I do. Do I think there are at least a couple performances that I think are very winning and kind of save the movie to a large degree for me? Yes, I do. Do I also find a lot of the stuff we're about to make fun of part of the charm of the movie? Yes. So I actually think this movie ends up falling into, I don't know how intentional it was. I think in some elements it was, more elements it wasn't. But I do think this is a movie that today can be a fun cult classic because it's like high camp to me, this movie. So I don't think it's necessarily a great Supergirl movie. I don't think it's necessarily a great superhero movie. I don't think it's necessarily a great movie. But do I still enjoy it largely in spite of itself? Yes. Will I agree with you on a lot of the criticisms? For sure. Yeah. And then the last thing I'll just also mention is, and this is probably not surprising either, I told you I saw this when I was 4, and then I watched it more times when I was growing up. So a big part of this for me is I had a huge crush on Helen Slater as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I do think, I'll just say that now so I, get it out of the way. I do think she's actually really good in this. The movie kind of fails her, and it's really unfortunate that it does. I think she deserves a better Supergirl movie than this. And then I'll say the other really fun performance to me is Faye Dunaway, who I think is having a blast, really diving into the camp sensibilities that I was talking about. But so, yeah, I like this, but I mean, I know what it is.
Yeah, you're coming from a very subjective point of view on this episode, probably. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I'm not too far off. I definitely am going to allow my objective brain maybe a little bit more into our conversation just because I don't have that history at all with this. Mm-hmm. Right off the top, let's say there's 10 different cuts of this film that has been released over the decades.
Actually, I should point out that the version I saw in the theater, which, I was 4, I don't remember everything about it, but that version just does not exist anymore.
Right.
Because in the theaters, this was only a 90-minute movie. And over the years, as it's gone into home video, they've expanded that cut. And now I've mentioned, I have a DVD of this, the limited edition Anchor Bay 2-disc special edition DVD. Out of a print run of 50,000, mine is 31,389. It's one of those ones that has the number stamped on the back. Cool. But yeah, it has the international version, which is the one I watched for this record. And then you watched the even longer director's cut.
Yes, I watched the 2-hour and 4-minute version. So yes, the director's cut. So right off the bat, I will say...
No, you watched the 2-hour and 4 one?
Yes, that's the one. That's international, I thought, right?
That's international, yeah. Sorry, okay, that's what I watched. But I have seen the director's cut, and we can talk about the changes. The director's cut is 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that's too long.
2 hours and 4 minutes is too long.
Yes, it is. And that's going to come into play. And again, it's going to skew a little bit of what I think about the film, too. Yeah. First and foremost, let me tell you what I think is very, very good. And I think Helen Slater is charm incarnate, right? Yes. She's beautiful. She is, again, charming. The movie absolutely fails her. In the Supergirl movie, they don't give enough to Supergirl. It kind of, in my cut, I felt that Faye Dunaway kind of steals the movie, but not in a good way. I think there's 80% of the movie is Faye Dunaway's Selena talking in rooms and watching the movie through a mirror. And the other 20% is Helen Slater actually getting to do something. But I think the problem with the interpretation of the character, in my opinion, is that Kara in this film is very childlike. She's very sweet. She's very innocent and quite adolescent. And I think that's almost like her defining characteristic in the film is that she's innocent. While that just kind of makes it bland, if that makes any sense. She's not. There's only 2 real quick scenes that she gets to show off some wit or any type of, I don't want to say intelligence, but that's not what I mean. But there's times that she says she doesn't know what a tree is or what ear piercings are. And then she's talking about physics and math and stuff. And then she's witty with the guy character. The script is doing her no favors at all.
She doesn't know what a tree is, but she knows what a letter of recommendation is to a
Yes.
school because she types one up for herself. Yeah.
Yes, and knows the Dewey Decimal System and how to file it and how to do all this other stuff. It's very it doesn't make any sense, but mind you, that's the movie. Supergirl doesn't make any sense in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I again, to people that know this film, I'm coming in as a newcomer, so you probably heard 40 years of people saying what I'm about to say, but let me just say it holds up in that sense. That the criticisms back then are still the criticisms now, I would say. But yeah, it's just it kind of is the movie that is to blame for female superhero cliches. This is one of the first, if not the first, big screen female superhero movies, and especially on a worldwide scale. And it just becomes, like Trev said earlier, two girls fighting over a boy. It doesn't. It's really stupid. The motivations are out to lunch. Our evil Selena is hellbent on world domination, but then she's just a bad witch who wants a boy toy. So it's not really threatening. I don't really care. And that's kind of the problem with the film, I think, in general, is that you walk out of it not really caring. It's just kind of a bunch of scenes thrown together, but Helen Slater is there as such a charming presence that it actually, I feel bad like talking shit about the movie. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so to respond to what you said, the thing about her being too childish, I hear you. I know what you mean. I don't think that had to be a failing of the movie. I think it is in that, in the way that movie is written. I think you could still have that be her primary characteristic and her personality, but you write the movie more around that. So I think the problem is the movie kind of forgets that it's treating the main character that way. And so when she, when they do put her into situations where suddenly her intelligence levels are inconsistent, or particularly when she ends up involved in this romantic, three-way, storyline where clearly a much older man is suddenly enamored with her, and it's becoming a weird statutory rape romantic storyline, then it has some problems there too. But so I think I actually really like the way Helen Slater plays it, and I think the childlike naivety of her, could have been really fun if the movie, just bought into it a little bit more itself. But yeah, I mean, it is a very stupid movie. That's the thing is, I really wish that 90-minute cut still existed, because I bet you that 90-minute cut would be a bigger cult thing today, because I bet you it's just more fun, because it's a movie that really loses a lot of steam, especially in the middle too. Because as you said, it kind of forgets its own mission. She certainly forgets her mission that she's been sent on. And the movie just meanders a lot and just takes its sweet time getting to what you really want to see, which is her finally confront Selena.
Yeah, in my cut, it took an hour and 20 minutes before they actually meet face to face.
Yes. And it's like, so as you said, let's talk a little bit more about the storyline here. Because we want to talk about how it makes no sense. You said that and I joked around, but this is a movie that aggressively makes no sense. So as someone not familiar with the character at all, Chris, and not familiar with the whole backstory, I mean, I just have to ask, how confused were you at the very beginning of this? Because it really does just toss you into Argo City with no explanation of what it is, how it's connected to Krypton. This is a movie that honestly needed some opening voiceover narration or a scrawl or something. Because they just don't even tell you what Argo City is or how it connects to Krypton. But she suddenly, at least from dialogue, she knows she's Superman's cousin. It sounds like they've been watching Earth. So it's how confused were you at the beginning of this movie?
Oh, extremely.
Yeah. It's not doing its audience any favors at the start.
No, right away I was like, I thought Krypton was blown up. I was like, what's going on? And why is everybody in here? And I didn't realize there was a small segment of the population that did live. No clue about that. Absolutely none at all. I just figured Supergirl had been separated at the time of Krypton's destruction or something, right? I had no idea. So walking into this, no clue that what was going on. This Omega Hedron stuff, is that in the comics too? Is it this power source? Is that all legit?
I obviously I haven't read all, over 70-year history of Superman and
Right.
Supergirl comics, so I couldn't speak to that. I don't know if the Omegahedron was probably just a MacGuffin they invented for this.
Mm-hmm.
The Argo City thing does track to the comics, and especially the original version of Supergirl. So there is Argo City, which is basically like kind of a satellite of Krypton that obviously, you know, they survived the explosion. It's just that Kal-El never knew that clearly.
Right.
So when he finds Argo City later, after he's already become Superman, he's obviously very excited and thrilled to find out that there are other surviving Kryptonians. That is the original version of Supergirl. I'll talk more later in the episode about how they've reinvented the character since, because I actually prefer the new version of the character and her new origin. But this movie is at least getting that right. That the original version is she comes from Argo City and comes to Earth, and she is his cousin. Now they're getting it right, but they're not explaining it to you. That's the problem. They're not giving you the context you need to understand that as a viewer.
Well, not only as a viewer, but does Superman know Argo City exists at this point in time? When Supergirl is happening, has it been mentioned in the other movies? Like,
No.
It hasn't. Okay, so it's
No.
even him that he had no idea.
Yeah.
Though then that's even more frustrating that he's not part of the film.
Yeah. Well, you can't get past the absence of Christopher Reeve does really hurt this movie because he hovers over it like a specter. We'll talk about how they kind of get around it, but yeah, I mean, you obviously want to see him very bad in this, if nothing else, because he was so perfect in that character and she is so perfect in this character. You just want to see them share the screen together, but it just doesn't happen.
And who knows? Maybe in the future we will see them together. We'll get to that.
Maybe
in a few episodes. But yeah, so they're in Argo City. The wizard Zoltar shows her this magical thing. That's all it is just the MacGuffin, right? And it powers Argo City. And then unfortunately that thing gets blown into space and Kara decides to chase after it. Somehow comes out of the lake.
Well, okay, so we can't do this for every scene because we'll be here for 8 hours.
Yeah.
But like, if we're just talking initially about how confusing this movie is, it's also very confusing. Like, where is Argo City? Because is it in space? Because they mentioned something about inner space. And when she goes like to chase the Omegahedron, which by the way, like you said, it blasts out the wall of Argo City, which looks to be made out of like tin foil.
Yeah,
It's like not
cellophane.
not the most sound structure to be in when you're in space. But yeah, it blasts out the wall and she goes after it. And then she goes into inner space to chase it, and they do. And I do love this.
Hold on, I forgot to say when it leaves. This is the thing. Sorry, there's a ticking clock mechanic that they forget about as well. So let's bring it up here. They say that this Argo City is powered by the Omegahedron, and they only have maybe a day or two to live.
Yeah, 2 days before they all die. Yeah,
okay. Go on.
We'll definitely keep that in mind as you watch her actions for the rest of the movie. So she goes to chase it. I think I brought this up in our Flash Gordon episode. I do love whenever they kind of do like space backgrounds by just like pouring various colored liquids into like a fish tank and film it. Like, so I love the look of the inner space. But then, as you said, like she comes out of the lake in Midvale where this movie takes place. So it's like, well, wait a minute. So now, is Argo City inside the Earth or is it in outer space? And then later things in the movie will confuse that even more. Like when she leaves at the end of the film, it seems like she goes into space. Again, I don't know. I don't think the writers know. You just have to. This is what I'll say about this movie. This is a movie that keeps consistently making dumb, baffling decisions. And that's the thing. Like, if you decide to have fun with that, that's the way to watch this movie, because you just have to turn your brain off and go, all right, I accept this makes no sense. And that's, I think, why I largely enjoy it now. Like, I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, I didn't think about those logical problems because I was so young, Sure. As an adult, I have to enjoy this as like, oh, this movie's really, really stupid. But it's so stupid that it ends up being kind of funny because it's just a confusing, baffling movie.
Well, like I'm the rule police guy on this podcast, right?
Oh, you must have. I mean, you would die during this movie. Like,
man, I had 3 pages of notes, and then I decided to condense it to 1, and just to say, my rule alarm is off the table. I'm going to mention things, but it's just because it's fun to talk about. Because she comes out of the lake. In full costume. How'd she get the costume? Who knows? Doesn't matter. Yeah. And remember, ticking clock mechanic, she needs to figure out where this Omegahedron is. Well, guess what? The Omegahedron lands in the lap of Selena, our evil sorceress.
No, to be fair, it lands in like their cheese dip.
Right, their nacho cheese. right. And she grabs it, and guess what? She automatically knows what it is and how to use it and how to wield it. Okay, move along. Then Supergirl is walking around. Oh no! First of all, actually, hold on. Let's put a pin in this. She does have a really cool scene that I quite liked is her discovering her powers of the sun and how she can fly. They called it a flying ballet in the production notes of this movie. And honestly, it's great.
This was a big idea of Jeanette Zwark, which I think this is where, he does do some nice things in this movie. And this is certainly one of them where he said, he's like, we're doing a Supergirl movie. We had to figure out how to differentiate her from Superman, because you don't just want her to be Superman with blonde, long hair.
Yeah.
He said, like, her flying should be more feminine and more balletic, and, like, that's what they do with it, where when she starts to discover her powers, she flies through the forest kind of very gently and almost like a dance, like you said, and then, she flies and she's meeting, like, she's flying over animals and smiling at them. It's all very, like, cute and very appropriate to her character.
It's really elegant and playful, and I was reminded of how Zack Snyder does it with Man of Steel, right? Like how the fucking guy rockets off and just like explodes through mountains and shit. And it's like the score by Hans Zimmer just fucking beating you to death, right? And it's compared to Kara in the forest, kind of just playing with bunnies. So I did like all of that. But then she gets distracted by, and again, we're not going to go scene by scene, but I really need to get to this part. She is walking through the forest and she sees a baseball team playing, and it's a bunch of young women. And she decides to disguise herself as Linda Lee, her alter ego.
On Earth, I'm Linda Lee.
Yes, and doesn't she look like Courtney Cox? Young Courtney Cox?
A little bit, yeah. A little bit. Another interesting thing about this, just if I can throw in little comic book nerd factoids every once in a while. In the comics, because obviously they did this because in the comics, just like Superman with Clark Kent, she had a human alter ego. She comes to Earth, and then Superman finds her. It's his cousin, and he decides to help her adapt to Earth. And so together they create this persona for her. And in the comics, it was Linda Lee Danvers. So that was her full name. And they decided in this movie to just drop it to just Linda Lee. They throw a little bit of an Easter egg at comic fans by the headmaster of the school, like the sexist headmaster just walks into the girls' like dressing room and everything, and for some reason keeps telling everyone how she's an orphan. His name is Mr. Danvers, so they threw the Danvers part in. But I don't know, I'm not going to put money down on this. I believe the reason they dropped the Danvers here and just had her be Linda Lee was because by this point Marvel had also introduced Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel or Miss Marvel at the time, and so because her name is Kara Danvers and then Carol Danvers, it was a little too confusing, so they just went with Linda Lee.
Sure, that makes sense. But she sees this all-girls school, decides to join the school because Trev, it's a girls' movie. And she's got to hang out with girls for the entire girl movie. And
here's where we get another where the powers make no sense, because they show her walking through, past a couple of trees, and as she walks, her hair changes colors, and her Supergirl costume just changes to the school outfit. Now, you could have just had stages. In stages. You could have just had a scene where she, steals one of the outfits, uses her super speed to go grab an outfit and then put it on. They didn't have to do that, but why not just make up a new power for her?
Yeah. It is something. And then, she kind of just weasels her way, like I said in the plot, to be part of this school. And she attends classes, and she plays field hockey, and
she goes to the headmaster, and when he walks out of the office for a moment, she uses her super speed to quickly type up a letter of recommendation from her cousin, Clark Kent. So she is aware of Clark Kent and of Superman. Like I said, so again, now you're like, okay, so the people in Argo City were watching Earth, and if that's the case, why doesn't she know what a tree is? It's like the inconsistencies just keep piling up.
Yes, and then the conveniencies start to show up. She is bunked with, what's her name again?
Lucy Lane.
Yeah, Lucy Lane. Lois Lane's sister, of course. Yep. And she's got a poster of Superman on her wall, and Jimmy Olsen shows up.
Yes. The only actual cast member from the Christopher Reeve Superman series.
But he just
But
he just shows up to hang out with Clark's cousin and Lois's young sister. I mean, it's just what is he doing in this small town? I didn't realize that, we make fun of universe movies, especially nowadays, all these cinematic universes feeling so small. Like the Star Wars universe, it just, everything is so small and everybody knows each other. I didn't realize this was happening in the 80s. It wasn't a new thing. But yeah, and remember, listeners, doesn't she got somewhere to be? She has to save her city and her parents and her people. But no, she's deciding to go hang out at Popeyes with some people and take classes at the school. This is where the movie just is completely off the rails, in my opinion. And it is cutting back so much back and forth between whatever Supergirl's going through at the school and Selena, our bad sorceress, right? It's weird, too, because the cuts are like, it spends 3 minutes with Selena having some villain monologue and talking to her henchmen and all these other things and coming up with plans. And then it'll cut back to Linda Lee doing like nothing for like a couple seconds. And then it cuts back to Selena. And I just felt like this movie was so confused on, are we a Selena movie or are we a Supergirl movie? And that could be my cut that I watched. But I gotta ask you, is yours the same? Did it feel like this movie was Selena's movie? And I understand it's Faye Dunaway, so she's a megastar. Yeah. But like it was that, right?
It's definitely, I mean, it is definitely that. I mean, as I said, I watched the same cut as you, at least this time. And like, but even with the director's cut, a lot of the additional material in the director's cut is more Selena stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe there was some hesitancy about, Helen Slater being an unknown. Maybe they weren't sure if she'd be able to carry the film. And they did get Faye Dunaway. So I think they just like locked in on saying, we have Faye Dunaway. Let's really ramp up the Faye Dunaway. And again, maybe like, you understand when that's like a character like Jack Nicholson is the Joker, you can kind of get away with that. I do think Faye Dunaway is pretty fun in this movie. It's like, I agree what she's being given to do is not the best material, but I think she knows what type of movie she's in and she's hamming it up a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, obviously the character takes over the movie to a degree you don't want. You keep wanting to get back to Supergirl and see more of her adventures. I mean, like I said, she doesn't have barely any action to do in this movie. We'll talk about what some of the action scenes are, but too much time is wasted with her just kind of farting around, not doing anything as Supergirl, and that's definitely a detriment to the movie. Yeah, I can't deny that.
Yeah, like there's like 20 minutes that's given to our villain drugging a guy with a potion, Ethan, played by Hart Bachner, who is that, what's his name from Die Hard?
Ellis.
Ellis from Die Hard. Also, in his younger years, David Duchovny vibes.
Yeah, I think he also kind of looks like Michael Bay a little bit.
I see that. Yeah, you're right. I can see that. But, again, the villain plot becomes magically trapping this man to be her love interest. Thing number 200 that doesn't make any sense. We don't know Selena's motivations. She wants to take over the world, but then is completely focused on banging this guy.
It's really strange because let's just talk more about this storyline.
Sure.
Really let the people who haven't seen the movie know how weird it is. Because as you said, Selena. So the idea with Selena is she is a like emerging witch. She's trying to be a witch, and she's being taught by a warlock named Nigel, who, by the way, you're talking about coincidences, is also the math teacher at this school.
Yes, yeah, right.
He's played by the great British comic actor Peter Cook, who's kind of like a British comic legend. I think he's good in this, but again, who cares?
Yeah,
what he's being given to do. But he's Nigel. He's an actual warlock, and he's trying to teach Selena how to be a witch, and she's just using him basically. He really likes her. She's just using him. And so when they find the Omegahedron, he's the one who kind of can really sense the power of it. And he tells her, like, yeah, I think with this we could do much more. And so she decides to just take it and leave him. And then she starts using it. And so she decides, working with her sidekick, Bianca, played by Brenda Vaccaro. By the way, I love, you can't tell me that, you're talking about what sucks in this movie and what's good. You can't tell me that an amusement park lair isn't good. Because I love an abandoned amusement park lair that they just bizarrely live in together.
And then always enters on a little tram.
Like a little train, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That was good.
It's great, yeah. So anyways, they decide to use this Megahedron to take over the world. But then this all starts because Bianca, like, sees Ethan doing his like yard work, and she like is like, ooh, he's hot. And it almost seems like Selena just is like, well, I'm gonna take him then, almost like just to dick over her friend.
Yeah. And
it never really seems even like that serious with her. She's just like, no, because you like him, I'll use a spell and make him fall in love with me. But it doesn't seem like it's like her main concern. She wants to take over the world. And then she does the spell on him, And the spell is this thing where he falls unconscious, and then when he wakes up, the first woman he lays eyes on, he'll be hopelessly in love with. And she's thinking that'll be her, but through a chain of events, he ends up like wandering off, walks through almost the entire town with his eyes closed somehow, passes roughly about 300 women that he probably saw, but he ends up putting his eyes on Linda Lee first, and falls in love with her. And it's really weird because... So you have a love triangle with one woman who is only really trying to get the guy to kind of like dick around with him for a bit to piss off her friend. And then a guy who's only in love with the hero of the movie because of a love spell. It's never very clear how much Linda or Kara really cares about Ethan. Like she seems kind of like, oh, I'm experiencing love and kisses for the first time. That's kind of neat. But it's not like the movie ever lets it become like a love for the ages, because obviously there is the weird age difference between them, but also it is generated entirely by a spell. Also, he doesn't know that it's Supergirl. I did actually like that. I liked the movie made the choice to have him fall in love with Linda Lee and not with Supergirl. Thought that was kind of neat. But yeah, it's just like, what a weird love triangle. There's so many strange decisions to power that all.
Well, and then the movie becomes Maximum Overdrive. You're saying that Ethan's bumbling around the town for 20 minutes. Why doesn't Selena just go get him? Instead, she magically possesses a tractor to scoop him up in a bucket. And first of all, extremely dangerous, can probably just crush him. Like, it's probably way easier to just go, hey, run outside of her little carnival and just grab him. Easy. Doesn't do that. And then you're saying Supergirl doesn't know... you don't know her feelings towards him, but Supergirl decides to save him in the bucket versus her bunkmate friend Lucy Lane, who is now passed out and knocked out inside of the tractor trying to drive it.
Even before that, like, first of all, you ask why they don't do that. Well, if you didn't do that, you wouldn't get Supergirl's first action scene like an hour and 10 minutes into the movie.
Oh
finally,
my God, yeah.
Yeah. But also, it's very funny because before she even like changes into her costume and finally does something about it, they show her as Linda Lee just like watch this runaway tractor wreak so much havoc in this town before she decides, man, maybe I should do something about this. Oh, that's right, I have superpowers. It's like, yeah, why don't you get on this right away? I know that Popeye's chicken's pretty good, but get your ass out there, because this is the scene. I alluded to it earlier. Heavy Popeye's chicken product placement. And in fact, Chris, I don't know if you came across it at all doing research in this movie, but there are some great like publicity stills from this movie of Helen Slater in her Supergirl costume posed outside of Popeye's chicken.
That's funny.
So I've used those on social media quite a bit over the years.
This really reminded me of the Thor 2011, all taking place in front of that 7-Eleven.
Mm-hmm.
This was very much that. Yeah, I don't know. This is the big action scene. Like, this is the big action scene other than the climax, which we'll get to later. But
don't forget her fighting that invisible monster.
Oh, yes, the invisible monster trap. I don't know about you, but it's not exciting? Fighting wind.
It's funny because like when that sequence started this time, I remember that, and like I think I even said out loud, it's like, oh, it's a great way to save your budget is to make an invisible monster, because that's like what it seems like the choice is, right? But then they actually show like there's some really cool miniature work where they built miniatures of, like, and you see the monster like walking through like the forest and like knocking over like a fence and everything. Mm-hmm. It's like, all right, so you had the money to build like the miniatures. It crushes a car, like a full-size car. She like takes a light post and flies into space and gets electrified and comes back. It's like, okay, so you were willing to spend money on all of this. You just weren't willing to build like the monster.
Yeah. I have a feeling the monster puppet or whatever just never fully worked.
Maybe it was the same one that's at the end that they only show like a little bit.
It has to be that, and even that one is like all covered in smoke.
Yeah,
and you can't really even see it anyways. But yeah, this action scene happens, and this love interest thing happens, and Kara saves Ethan, but then Ethan gets flown back to being with the witch, and then, for whatever reason, the witch knows what the Phantom Zone is, and we send Supergirl to the Phantom Zone. And again, my rule alarm, just going nuts. Like, how does she know how to use this Omega Hedron? How does she know what a Phantom Zone is? Why does Supergirl not know what the Phantom Zone is when she gets sent to it, even though prior in the movie Peter O'Toole's character Zoltar says, I must go to the Phantom Zone now. So obviously the Kryptonians know what the Phantom Zone is. Of course they do. But why doesn't Supergirl know this? And it goes back to that childlike inconsistency that she comes off as kind of an idiot. And that is a bad... Oh, that's just a bad or unfortunate choice to have your heroine just be kind of a dodo bird in a weird way. Like she's charming, she's beautiful. You want to be around her because she's just so nice. But to, cheer her on to take on the forces of evil, you're kind of like, they got somebody better.
I agree. I will say though that like at this point when she gets taken to the Phantom Zone and like meets back up with Zoltar, who's banished himself to the Phantom Zone because he was like in shame for letting the Omega Hedron get stolen, or not stolen, but get blasted out of Argo City. Yeah. So he's banished himself there. So she goes to Argo City, or she goes to the Phantom Zone, meets up with him. First of all, this is a point where if this was a movie that was made in like the 2000s or made today, there would definitely be more like larger universe building here. The whole time she's in the Phantom Zone, you're thinking like, oh my god, is she going to run into like Zod? Like that, and that would definitely happen today. Totally. But no, it's just Zoltar.
Zoltar, who's been there forever, in his words, when it's only been like 3 days.
Well, but I think that's part of the Phantom Zone, right?
Oh, I guess so. Yeah, okay.
So I do want to say, though, from this point on is when the movie finally kind of comes to life a little bit more, because now you're finally like, okay, we're building to the climax. And also, I think these sequences do work because I do want to say, you finally mentioned his name. I think the other MVP of this movie is Peter O'Toole as Zoltar, because I guarantee you, from everything I know about Peter O'Toole, everything the world knows about Peter O'Toole, I guarantee you he was drunk off his ass making this movie. But Peter O'Toole is such an amazing actor that even when he's drunk off his ass, and even when he knows he's in a crap movie like he clearly did here, he never phones it in, right? Peter O'Toole is just always super magnetic and super like great on screen. And I do think he's really fun as Zoltar. And I actually think him and Helen Slater have like a really nice chemistry together. I think there seems like they really do feel like a real like mentor, like really a student who looks up to him. And I do like their scenes together at the beginning and even in the Phantom Zone. So I think like every time he's on screen, the movie has a little bit more class, obviously. Sure. And it's always just nice to see him. So it's like I almost wish he was like a more consistent presence through the film, not just at the beginning and then here at this sequence.
Yeah, you're right, because he kind of like sacrifices himself to get her out of the Phantom Zone, and then she's back in the evil lair to fight Selena, the final fight, and she decides never to fly, which is a real thing I love to watch, is Selena starts to break the floor around her and threaten her friends from, by falling onto spikes and stuff. And Supergirl just decides not to use her powers of super speed and flight. And riddle me this, That was driving me crazy, especially breaking the floor. And she was on the ground and she's crawling on all fours to get over these tiles that are breaking apart.
She forgot, all right?
Yeah, just like the Game of Thrones guys, right? Oh, they kind of forgot about these guys. They kind of forgot.
Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
She forgot?
Yeah. Again, it goes back to it's not by design, but as a viewer, I'm watching my hero, be stupid.
Well, it's weird because, again, this is the kind of thing where you wish people who cared more about the comics and about making a good comic book movie had been given a couple passes at this screenplay, because I don't know if you know this, Chris, but one thing that is true in the comics, because you obviously the big overall complaint about Superman, which would obviously be a complaint about Supergirl as well, is he's too overpowered, right? He's a crappy hero because he can do everything. Why is that exciting? But I don't know how many, if you're only a casual fan of Superman, you might not know. And then in the comics, one thing Superman actually cannot deal with and has a really hard time fighting is magic. That's one of his biggest obviously there's the kryptonite and everything, but if a character is powered by magic, Superman actually has a really hard time with it. And so you could have actually justified all of her struggles at the end of this by making that more of a point of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Where, oh, she's got all of Superman's powers, but it doesn't matter when she's up against a witch. But the movie never like verbalizes that. The movie never sells it in any meaningful way. So it just, like you said, like by the time you get to the end, it's not clear what Selena's powers are. It's not clear how strong Supergirl is in terms of how she can fight her. And so the final battle between them is not very exciting, obviously, even though you do get a giant monster puppet. I always like seeing a giant monster puppet. I do like the bizarre moment where it grabs Supergirl and starts pulling her, and she turns like one-dimensional for some reason as he stretches her. But yeah, it's just not exciting because we don't understand like the danger because it's just not been sold to us in any way that makes sense.
I think the ultimate failing of this movie is really it's inconsistent, you know. And I think, you know, like, and that's kind of the movie. That's kind of the end of the movie there. Like Supergirl ends up winning, you know, of course, and she gets the Megahedron and then decides to go back into the lake and back to Argo City.
Pieces out, man.
Yeah, just
that's what I mean. Like the thing with Ethan, she's just like, yeah. Anyways, I'll see you later. He's like kind of over it already. He's like, yeah, I know you got to go. Cool, whatever.
And the people around her know her alter ego, and then just decide, yeah, we're on the honor system. So okay, fair enough. So and then the movie just ends. You know, the failings of this movie are inconsistency. The rules don't matter. Our hero is played all over the place, even by the script, but also by Helen Slater's performance. So it's a strange one. I think that's the reason this movie just doesn't work, you know? Like I
can't let us wrap this up without talking about a scene that we blew right past, though. Because if we're going to talk about weird 80s movies, and that's what this falls into for me, right? Like, this is a movie, like, you know, like, I think Buckaroo Banzai is a much better movie than this. I'm sure you don't. But, you know, like, we don't like how just that, like, bizarre creativity of the 80s but like, also, like, bizarre storytelling decisions.
Sure.
If you want to place this movie firmly into, like, weird 80s movies, and especially weird movies that are, like, rated PG for the 80s, we have to acknowledge the attempted rape scene.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
so as you said, this is like the first big Hollywood superheroine movie, right?
Yeah.
Supergirl's finally being brought to screen. We're gonna have this like female empowerment movie, and one of the first scenes on Earth is two truckers who attempt to rape her.
Yes, it's odd because all the men in this movie, and I don't want to sound whatever, but all the men in this movie are either immediate rapists, dumb hunk landscapers, or just mean men. Like mean principals and teachers. And the attempted rape scene is so out of left field and so like again we get it, you know what I mean? Like I get it. I understand what you're saying, but you didn't have to go so hard in the paint with that. Cuz these two truckers stop to see Supergirl in the middle of the road at night, get out of the truck, and immediately, like as if they're just made of evil. She says it. She says it.
Yeah, she says, like, why are you doing this? And Matt Frewer, who's one of the rapists, just says in a chilling line, he says, it's just the way we are. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'm just sitting back being like, oh, no. Obviously, she kicks their butts, of course. They definitely don't get the comeuppance that they deserve.
No, then because as all ugly attempted rape scenes should end, it ends on like a comedy note where they're like laying there afterwards like, we probably shouldn't tell anyone about this. And then the music might as well just be like, you know, it's like, all right.
Yeah, and you know how I feel about rape scenes in films, and I know this isn't technically a rape scene, but they really gotta mean something, and this one just felt lazy and gross and cheap and weird and being like,
because like they see her and like it is the only time in the movie too where it's kind of acknowledged that if people saw her, they probably would, because Superman is obviously a known character in this world. We didn't mention that the movie gets away with like him not being there by you just hear a radio broadcast in the background saying Superman has left the Earth on some kind of peacekeeping mission or something. So that's why he's not around. But the truck drivers, they like see her and they just assume she's wearing like a Superman costume, like a Superman Halloween costume. Mm-hmm. And that's honestly what would be the case in this world, right? Anybody who would see her would just be like, oh, it's just a girl wearing a Superman costume. But it's weird how the only characters who verbalize that are these two scumbags. And then I did wonder too, because like I made the joke earlier about the product placement, and I've already mentioned where the Popeye's chicken is. But there's like a prominent A&W like vending machine at the school that you keep seeing. Mm-hmm. But then also like Matt Frewer is wearing an A&W shirt here, and I was like, man, if they paid for product placement, I wonder if when they saw the movie, they saw us being like, wait a minute, why'd you put our shirt on that guy?
Yeah, it's a choice. It's a choice. Like you said, for your PG, first flight of this character. I don't know, just out of place, and very, very. But you're right. So 80s. So 80s.
Oh, what I was going to say is it almost felt like, and this is like the depressing thing about it, is because it is so unnecessary and out of place. It almost feels like it exists only because the men who made this movie had the thought that, like, well, if anybody saw a woman who looked like Helen Slater dressed like that, of course this is probably what would happen.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, yeah.
There's a lot of that in this movie. I think this movie is, it's not the feminist film it maybe thinks it is at times. We said, the plot is about two girls fighting over a man when you boil it down. And then even at the end, Lucy Lane, kisses what's his nuts, Jimmy Olsen for no reason. It's just
another like big age difference problem there. And
it's all over the place. It's it's a female movie that's made by a lot of the guys.
There's things that could make it more feminist and just like more, and some of it probably if it was made today, like if they attempted this same movie today, the same script, probably some of the stuff that got to screen would be a little different. Even think of the way Selena and Bianca are played. It's kind of like these two middle-aged women living together, and they do give like couple vibes. And like the whole time I'm watching the movie, I'm just kind of thinking like, forget this Ethan guy. I would rather these two just be a couple. Like Selena and Bianca should be a couple because they seem to have like more chemistry. They're more fun together. They're living together in this place. So like, yeah, you could probably do that now. But certainly I don't think you would have the thrust of the movie be the Ethan thing. You would just have Kara remember she's here to get this goddamn Omega Hedron and try to get it as quick as possible.
Yeah, so strange. Because like when she goes back to Argo City at the end, all her people must be dead, right? Like they're all laying there just in skeletons.
We see the lights turn on. We don't see her just find everyone dead.
It should have, like the score is all like rousing and big and stuff. She should have flown right into the palace and then the lights go on, right? And then it all goes quiet and you just hear her blood-curdling screams.
Yeah.
You know what I was
all that said, though, I'd say still, if you get a chance, watch it because it is a bizarre, baffling movie. Watch it for Helen Slater, watch it for Faye Dunaway, and watch it for Peter O'Toole.
For sure.
And can I also just mention, we're talking about the cast. It's funny, it's such an afterthought that's why it just was an afterthought to me. Very, very weird that they have Mia Farrow in it for like 10 seconds as her mom in Argo City. And I'm like, what? Like, why is Mia Farrow here for like nothing? She has like 2 or 3 lines. And she's like, that's a pretty big get and for no reason.
Yeah. This is kind of, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the Superman series a little bit like, even like the way that they got Marlon Brando for like a scene or two for like so much money? Like, it feels like that, right? Yeah, but you get that because
Marlon Brando plays, like, Jor-El. So that, like, to me makes sense because Jor-El is such an important character. And, like, honestly, he's, like, the first whole part of that movie is, like, on Krypton. And then we get to see him later as, like, the hologram, hear his voice. And it's, like, there's an importance to Jor-El, like, that is Superman's dad. And he's, like, it's a very crucial character. That this is just Kara's mom who, like, yells at her, like her mentor is Altar, not her mom. Like that's why it's strange that it's a big star.
Yeah, I think the movie is fun at times. Again, I'm a little less than you are. Just like
that's what I expected. There's
some nostalgia goggles, of course, right? And that's fine. I've been called much worse for my takes on things, but I just think maybe the reason why this didn't catch on for, like I said, inconsistency, but also like we like Helen Slater's Supergirl, but is she compelling enough to carry multiple movies? From this outing, I would say no. I like Helen Slater. She went on to do a lot of work. She never became a huge star, but she ended up in the Smallville series as I think Clark's mom, right?
In Smallville, she was I think she's Clark's Kryptonian mother. And then on the Supergirl show with Melissa Benoist, the CW one, she was her adopted Earth mother. So,
right.
she's been able to do both. Yeah.
So
I will say, like on the Helen Slater thing, just so I can throw out another quick recommendation, because this isn't a movie we'd ever talk about here because it's not a franchise attempt starter, but the very next movie she does, and in a lead role, is 1985's The Legend of Billie Jean. One of my favorite 80s movies. Love that movie. I would highly recommend it to anyone. Her brother in that is played by Christian Slater. They're not related in real life, but I think to this day you see a lot of people think they are because of that. Yeah.
That's funny. She's also uncredited. I don't know if you remembered, but she's uncredited in an episode of Seinfeld as Becky Gelke. There's the episode where people sneeze, and then Jerry's like, "You're so good looking." He says that to her, and then she slams the door in his face. And that was kind of cool because, of course, we know Jerry Seinfeld, gigantic Superman nerd. That would have been cool to get Supergirl onto his show.
Anyway, this person told me to tell you to get an estimate on the damage.
Well, I already got an estimate. It's $875.
$875?
That's right.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you a check, and then this person can pay me back. Who do I make it out to?
Becky Gelke, Gelke.
So, what are you doing this weekend?
You have got some nerve. You smash up my car, you don't admit it, and now you want to ask me out on a date?
I didn't do it.
Yeah, right.
You are so good looking.
Thank you.
But yeah, I like Helen Slater. There's nothing against her here. It's cool that the fandom. I'm gonna actually say something nice about fandom here, but it's cool that the fandom embraced her after this and continued to, realizing the movie kind of stunk, but they kind of championed her, and that's good because she was young. She was 19 when she made this movie. A young woman. I guess she dealt with some eating disorders as well. Like, I know she's been open about that. So it is nice to hear that the industry didn't really chew her up and spit her out, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, she did have a good career. She has popped up in things, and
and we just said it's cool that anytime there's like a new Superman project, there's probably like a cameo for her in there or something.
And even like she was just recently on speaking of Smallville. What's his name? Rosenbaum? Michael Rosenbaum?
Michael Rosenbaum,
right? Yeah, she was just on his podcast. I didn't listen to it, but I know I listened to maybe like a minute of it to see if I could find any tidbits even for our podcast. But she just is awesome. I can listen to her. I know I didn't listen to the whole episode, but I could listen to her talk for hours. She is so pleasant and so welcoming and still beautiful. She's just great. I really like her. I'm glad she didn't get poo-pooed by everyone. You know?
I mean, I agree that like you don't necessarily watch the movie and think like, wow, I it's too bad she didn't get like a bunch more like shots of this, just because the movie is such a nothing kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I do think there's enough with her here that I think she could have carried more with better scripts. And I do think it's a shame she never got to share the screen with Christopher Reeve, like at this point.
Yeah.
To see the two of them together, just because they were so both perfect in the roles. In fact, I think she didn't even meet Christopher Reeve until after making this movie.
I understand you met with Christopher Reeve, right? And talking about the whole thing of the Superman, Supergirl image and all that kind of thing, and he gave you some advice. What kind of advice did he give you?
Well, I met him after I finished Supergirl, so really the advice were all afterthoughts. But there's a wonderful story, which was after we were finished and all that, we were sitting on Central Park West. It was really, really very, very late at night. And I was sitting in front of the Aldwin Hotel. Do you know where that is on Central Park West?
Oh, yeah.
Huge, huge hotel, 225 Central Park West. And all of a sudden, we're sitting there just talking about, I don't even remember what we're talking about, but 6 huge fire trucks come out of nowhere and park dead in front of the Aldwin. And all the windows go up, and mothers and children are screaming. They don't know what's going on. 100 firemen come out getting the hoses, and and there's Superman, Supergirl, helpless, sitting there, unable to do a thing. And he turns, he looks, and he says, "Well, I guess it's our night off." I said, "Yeah, I guess it is. What are we going to do?"
Helen, thank you.
But yeah, I think that would have been nice to actually get to see the two of them together. But yeah, like you were just, if you were just doing your sum up, I mean, I hope you understand like my thoughts on this movie. Like this is a movie where I know it's a bad movie, you know, but for me, this is a fun bad movie. That's what I mean, and not always. I will say it is too long. Like it'd be more fun if you did slice off about 20 minutes or so. Like I said, that 90-minute cut would probably be the sweet spot. I wish that still existed, but I think there's enough. It's so dumb and so like the decisions they make are so out of left field so often that I think that's the enjoyment of it. And then at the same time, you have a few good performances kind of trying to battle the script. So I think it's like an interesting watch, but I don't blame anyone for saying it's a bad movie or not liking it. So yeah, for me, it's surely powered by some nostalgia, powered by a childhood crush that's still pretty heavy, and then just powered by enjoying this kind of bad movie. You know?
I think it's funny when a disaster like this happens for, you know, such a, let's be honest, this movie was a Hail Mary for the franchise. You know, like Superman 3 tanks and everybody hates it. And then they decide to freshen it up with Supergirl, right? And then to spin off and create this brand new thing and get them to team up in the future and really re-up the brand and the franchise. And I always find it fascinating when we talk about movies like this type of franchise starter where so much is on the line, and yet everybody threw everything into a blender and had no idea how to glue it all back together. You know what I mean? Like at every instance, it's like the most baffling decision, or nobody ever thought, well, that makes no sense. What about this? There was no committee that maybe would have been needed on this one.
Well, you know what? There wasn't. Yeah. And I know you and I bristle against this idea sometimes.
Sure.
But like, I don't think you and I subscribe to the thought that like a man can't tell a woman's story or vice versa. But this needed some feminine voice, like in like the scripting phase or somewhere in the production, to be like, hey, you realize it's pretty sexist to boil this all down to two women just fighting over a guy, right? Like there needed to be someone there to point out that there needs to be a stronger feminine narrative behind this.
But Trev, then you get not just Supergirl 1984. You get Wonder Woman 1984. So be careful what you ask for, truly.
There's a good middle ground in there somewhere. Yeah. You know, it's the movie Wonder Woman. So
yes,
which
for
I know was written by a man, but you know, you had Patty Jenkins as like another, you know, as a voice there. So that's what I mean. Like you need everyone should work together to make these movies. God damn it.
You know what I always felt like a sidebar about Wonder Woman, the first one. Because I think the first one's amazing. The first one to me is...
The first one's one of the best movies of this whole superhero, you know, genre. Boom, you know.
Oh, 100%. Like, I've seen it many, many, many times. I absolutely love that movie. And I think when I first saw it in theaters, the moment I really felt like Patty Jenkins, I guess, grip on the film was the love scenes. I found they were just like so classy and so romantic and so loving. Like between those two characters in the first movie just felt so right and felt with like a deft hand was handling everything. And then she made her rape him in the second movie. So
it's funny because I thought you were going to say that, and the moment I knew that the Supergirl was written and directed by men was the love scenes in this one. So.
Yeah, it's the DC universe is a mess, and I think it's going to be fun going along this this theme for our podcast here, because starting here, it's just funny to see the seeds of things that we will continue to see throughout the decades. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like it's I said earlier in this episode that this one felt like kind of the one to blame for a lot of these cliches, a lot of these issues that come later. And you know what? It just studios, they're going to studio, and they're not going to learn from their past mistakes. They never do. It's the dumbest industry in the world, and here we are.
Well, and you know, I think is interesting why it is perfect is because, like I said, we're actually charting like from the 80s on every decade up till now. Mm-hmm. And I think these movies are going to be a great snapshot of like different times, and not just superhero movies, but movies in general. Because as I said, one of the reasons I like this movie beyond its like insanity is that it's the ultimate encapsulation of a dumb poorly thought out, over the top 80s movie.
Totally.
And the next one we look at is going to be like a perfect encapsulation of the dumb 90s superhero movies.
Yep.
And in fact, it's another failed Superman spinoff. So, Chris, do you want to let the people know what we're looking at next time?
Of course. We're going to be looking at 1997's Steel, starring Shaquille O'Neal.
One of our great thespians.
Yeah, reaping that Space Jam maybe wave. I'm sure we'll talk about why he was cast. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're going to be looking at that one next episode, and then we're going to continue with the DCPU with Superman Returns from 2006, then Green Lantern from 2011, Black Adam from 2022, and then, well, The Flash just came out, but like Trev said on our Artemis Fowl episode, we're pretty confident that we will not be seeing a sequel to The Flash, nor will we be seeing Ezra Miller in the DCU going forward. But
yeah,
here we are. Follow along, as usual, at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2FPod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Throw us a star rating on whatever app you're using. That'd be awesome. And then join the tribe. Hit that subscribe. And yeah, follow along the DCPU. I'm really looking forward to this. This was fun. I like this a lot.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, no, it was fun to watch this movie again, but more fun to know that I could talk about. That's the other thing I should say is, like, I like watching this movie so that I can talk about how dumb it is afterwards.
For sure.
So, and I definitely look forward to doing that again with some of these other options. Yeah. So.
Oh, listeners, don't shut off your podcast yet. Earlier, Trev mentioned he wanted to discuss what he liked about the new incarnation of Supergirl versus the old incarnation. So, you know what? Trev, take it away.
Yeah, sorry I forgot, but I thought it's just kind of interesting because we were talking about how this version from this movie kind of hits on the Argo City version of the character's origin. But in like more recent times, they've reinvented the Supergirl character to where the idea is that they take the Argo part completely out of it. And instead, it's that she still Superman's cousin, but she has been living on Krypton her whole life. When he's a baby, when Krypton's about to explode, she's already a teenager, and she already knows Kal-El. She's his cousin. She's like babysat for him. She's taking care of him, and her parents send her as well in a rocket and say, "You have to go to Earth with Kal-El. Kal-El's just a baby. When you get there, you need to raise him. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just a kid." And she's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I love my cousin." And so she flies off at the same time as him. The problem is her rocket gets stuck in like a black hole, like a time warp. And so by the time she finally gets to Earth, she's still a teenager, but not only is Kal-El not a baby, he's grown up and he's Superman. He's the most powerful hero on Earth. And so they've kind of sold us like this idea that now she's really confused because she knew him as a baby. She thought she was coming to Earth to take care of him. Not only does she not need to take care of him, he's the man, and like, so they kind of play her sometimes. She's like a little bit more angry. She's got like a chip on her shoulder. But there's just that nice kind of, bizarre relationship between the two of them where she's thrown off by the fact that she was supposed to be sent to take care of him. And I think that's like really interesting. I prefer that version. And I wanted to bring it up because who knows, maybe later on in the DCPU, we'll get a chance to talk about that version of Supergirl. So we'll see.
For sure. Yeah. That's cool. I like the idea of her being an absentee guardian in a way, and kind of having to deal with that. For sure.
Yeah, there's two great like Superman animated films. One is Superman Batman Apocalypse, and then one Superman Unbound that adapt a couple of like, the key Supergirl stories of that era. And I would say people should check those out because, spoiler alert, they're much better than the Helen Slater Supergirl movie.
Did they incorporate this at all into that CW show from you remember or know about it?
The Supergirl show operates off that idea, the fact that she got here and he was already Superman.
Cool.
And so they don't play her with a chip on her shoulder. She's a very light, likable character. She's very Superman-esque, but they do use that version of the origin.
Right.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, let's give the final word to Jeb Bush.
There's an ad promoting Supergirl. She looked pretty hot. I don't know what channel it's on, but I'm looking forward to that.
What would you do to...
That'll make news.